Hello, everyone. I am Jose Garcia Moreno. I'm the director of the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination here at Loyola Marymount University. And I welcome you to a conversation of great relevance about one of our most tragic social phenomena, child abduction, a problem of enormous magnitude and global impact. And with us, we have a respected international panel which includes activists, doctors, politicians, and filmmakers. They have not only been experts on this complex and devastating problematic, but also some of them have also suffered it at a personal level. Therefore, I'm so deeply grateful for their upfront activism to fight publicly against it with knowledge, creativity, and determination. I would like to mention that for all of you watching, you may find also in this event webpage important resources such as the Missing Kids organization page and also the report Children Abducted by Family Members, National Estimates and Characteristics published by the United States Justice Department. So with us, my dear friend, professor in the School of Film and Television, Glenn Gebhard, will guide us through this important conversation and will introduce next our esteemed panelist. And thank you, Glenn, again for pointing us into the direction of this important topic. Glenn?
Thank you, Jose. I'd like to just give an idea of what this topic is, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists, including myself. I'm a panelist as well as moderating this. I'd like to thank the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination, and especially Emily Lou Reyes and Jose Moreno for bringing this to you. So every year, more and more cases of parental abduction are recorded throughout the world. Many of these abductions are to foreign countries. It is common for the abduction of a child to occur during a heated or emotional dispute between the child's parents. In many cases, this happens at the early stages of separation or divorce, or while the courts decide where the child should live and with whom. Abductions can also happen after custody. Arrangements have been made by the courts when one party, unhappy with a decision, decides to take the law into his or her own hands and flee with the child to another country. International parental abduction of US and foreign children have been reported in countries all over the world. Children who are victims of international parental abduction are often taken from a familiar environment. They find themselves suddenly isolated from their community, family, and friends. They may miss months or even years of schooling. Children also can move to multiple locations in order to stay hidden or out of reach of the left behind parent. In some cases, the child's name, birth date, and physical appearances are altered or concealed to hide identity. In most cases, abduction is considered illegal in both the home country and the country where the child has been abducted to. In other cases, the courts in a particular country where the child ends up are unable or unwilling to intercede to return the child to his or her habitual home. This often leads to the child being denied access to one parent for years. The tense and unfavorable situation between the parents surely can be extremely emotionally troubling to the child. Abducted children are at a high risk for long-term psychological problems, including anxiety, eating disorders, nightmares, mood swings, sleep disturbances, and aggressive behavior. As adults, these children often struggle with identity, relationships, and family issues. In addition, this problem negatively affects a myriad of other people besides the children, including the left behind parent, the left behind family, and I would say the abductor, him or herself. With that, I'd like to introduce our panel, and I'd like to start out with Dr. Jeffrey Greif. He's a professor at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, where he has worked since 1984. He was an associate dean from 1996 to 2007. He is the author of more than 140 journal articles and book chapters in 15 books. These include When Parents Kidnap, The Families Behind the Headlines, co-authored with Dr. Rebecca Hager, and Adult Siblings Relationships. In 2001, he chaired Governor Paris Gardening's commission to study sexual orientation discrimination in Maryland. I'd next like to introduce Baroness Catherine Meyer. Catherine Meyer, CBE, is a British conservative politician and life peer. She is currently His Majesty's government's trade envoy. Baroness Meyer began in financial services, where for several years she pursued a successful career as a commodity broker. She later became a leading child advocate and campaigner, setting up her own registered charity in Britain and America, which she ran for 19 years. It was called Parents and Abducted Children Together. Now it's Action Against Abduction. She has been active in politics on behalf of the Conservative Party since 2004. In 2012, she was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE, by the Queen for services to children and families. In 2018, she was ennobled as life peer, taking the title of Baroness Meyer of Nine Elms. Baroness Meyer has authored 2 books on her personal experience of child abduction. She is married to Sir Christopher Meyer, a former British ambassador to the US. She has 2 sons and 2 stepsons. Sarah Cecile Finkelstein was one of the original milk carton kids who was the subject of a nationwide search as a child. Sarah experienced an international child abduction from Norway to the US, where she was hidden within the ultra-Orthodox Jewish Hasidic community for 14 years. Sarah found herself on a milk carton when she was 13, and this was a turning point in her life. Although she already knew that she had been taken from her mother, she never thought of it as an abduction until her picture on the back of that milk carton. It was only the start of a long journey to find her place in her family and in the world, as she rejected her father and the Orthodox Jewish life in which she had been raised, got to meet her mother for the first time in 12 years, and struggled to make sense of it all that had occurred. Were her father's actions justified in any way? This was a question that haunted Sarah for years. Sarah's story has been featured on media in the USA and Europe, such as CNN, The Guardian, New York Times, and more. And I want to, I guess, read my bio since I'm on the panel itself. So I'm going to talk in the third person. Gebhard is an Emmy Award-winning film and video producer, director of documentaries and narrative films. He is also a professor and chair of the production department at Loyola Marymount University School of Film and Television in Los Angeles. Gebhard's recent work includes a series of 4 documentaries called Cuba at a Crossroads. He also completed Cuba, A Lifetime of Passion with HDNet, Crossing Borders, A Cuban Returns, which aired on public television, Bayman, which aired on New York Metro's channel and public television, Dreaming a New Cuba for the New York Times television, which aired on the Showtime channel, and A Foreign Picture aired on public television. Gebhard's latest documentaries are Sarah Cecile, Cuba, A Lifetime of Passion, and Cuba, The Forgotten Revolution, released by American Public Television to PBS nationwide. Cuba, The Forgotten Revolution won an Emmy for Best Documentary and streamed on Netflix. Gebhard recently completed American Rebels in Cuba. I'd like to now take a couple of minutes for the panelists to give us, a couple of minutes to why they got involved with this issue. So I'd like to start out with our, Dr. Greif, who maybe you could give us a few words why that you found this particular subject interesting to you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for that nice invitation, and thanks for the nice introduction. And good to see Sarah and Lady Catherine again, who I met at the British Embassy many years ago. I became interested in the topic because at the extreme end of divorce, you find people unable to obviously resolve issues around custody. And I had done a great deal of research on fathers raising children alone and mothers without custody, and also research on what happens when parents lose contact with their children following divorce. But the topic of child abduction is at the extreme end of divorce, when parents can negotiate a somewhat amicable or very amicable ending to their marriage. They are usually able to figure out how to share custody. It's when there are extreme differences of opinion, of culture, inter-ethnic differences, inter-religious differences sometimes, or sometimes just extreme personality differences, that how children are raised becomes a battleground in between the relationships between the two parents. So I became interested in this area and found there was a great need to do a national US survey. So I headed up a US survey with the help of the missing children's organizations in the United States. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Greif. Catherine Meyer, Baroness Meyer, would you like to say a few words about how you got involved with this?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this panel, which is a very important subject to all of us as parents and as Sarah Cecilia as a child. And basically, I got involved because of my own personal case. Is that many years ago, I was married to a German. We had children together. I had custody. The children were living with me in London, and I sent them on holiday to see their father, as our agreement had stipulated. But that was the end of the story. The children went to Germany, and from then, I basically had not seen my children for 10 years, except for 24 hours. And you would have thought that in the European Union and the modern world, Germany, UK, all this could have been sorted out, especially since I had custody, since the High Court of Justice in the United Kingdom declared that the children should come back to the UK immediately. But that's not how the story evolved. And so the reality of the situation is that as a parent, which is obviously a very different emotion and experience that you have as a child, and that's why it's so good that this panel has parents, a father, a mother, and a child, now an adult who can talk about it. But it is the most horrific experience that I think any human being can go through. And this is why I set up a charity, because I wanted to raise awareness of an issue which was very not known. And people sort of thought, oh, well, you know, mother, father is their own problem, but they never actually really looked at the reality of things. How does it affect the child? And Sarah Cecilia will tell you more about that. But on the other hand, also as a parent, because as a parent, you can't lead a normal life anymore, you know, knowing that your children are somewhere else and you can't have any contact to your children, and knowing that your children are obviously being fed horrible stories about you. And the point is that the system doesn't actually protect children for the moment. And to cut to the chase, I spent 10 years fighting in court, spending all my money to no avail, until my eldest son, at the age of 18, actually did contact me. And now, thankfully, we have a decent relationship. And in the meantime, we've all been affected. So I'm really pleased to be here. And thank you very much.
Thrilled Sarah's here, because Sarah was the subject of the film. And, you know, I put her through a lot of difficult days, both her and her mother. And I really do appreciate what you gave to us in agreeing to be in this film, Sarah. So maybe you could say a few words about yourself and how you got involved with this subject.
I'm so pleased and so honored to be here with people who have dedicated their lives in one way or the other to this issue. And in the case of Glenn and Catherine, who have experienced this personally as parents, and Dr. Greif, you have delved into this in a more deep way than just about any other professional on earth. And I so appreciate all of the written work that you've done and the interviews. You've interviewed me, and all of you have led me to where I am today. And it's taken a long time to come to a place of some stability and peace. It really, really has. And all of the effects, Glenn, that you listed in the beginning that can happen to a child happened to me. I'll share that I spent a long periods of time in psychiatric hospitals over the years, starting from my young adulthood, because, and at the time I didn't even really know why. I just thought that I'm very depressed. I'm very anxious. Something's wrong. I of course I knew that I had this history and about, I knew that I was abducted, but it has taken such a long time to understand the depth of the pain and confusion that being abducted caused for me. And I tried for a time to find a connection in with children who'd been adopted, thinking that maybe there's a parallel there, and there are some. I thought that maybe children of abuse, children who dealt with severe abuse, were people that were sort of my people, and there are parallels there too. But there is something very unique, I must say, about parental abduction, and it has something to do with identity. It has everything to do with identity, really, and just finding some peace in who I am, in what does it mean to be part Norwegian? What does it mean to be my mother's daughter? These were such fundamental questions that came up time and time again. And it's only in the last few years that I've really, as a mother myself, and I'm so fortunate to have a wonderful, supportive husband. And it's really only in the last few years that I have come to the foundation of what has been so painful, and really it has to do with identity. And we'll go into that more as we go along in the panel. And I look forward to sharing more with all of you. So I'm just so pleased to be here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And since I'm a member of the panel, I will say a little bit about my story, which was in a way similar to Catherine Meyer's story, in that I lost my children to Germany, and they were taken to Germany, and I had rights, but German government would not execute those rights. And so I lost my children between the age of 3 and 15. And it only ended, it was unfortunate how it ended, is their mother passed away. And so I had 2 15-year-old children who I hadn't seen since they were 3 on an airplane coming to Los Angeles. So that was quite a journey for myself and my wife. But I got involved with this issue. It was really interesting because I was watching television and my children had been abducted and were in Germany and I couldn't see them. And I saw Barbara Walters interviewing the wife of the British ambassador, Catherine Meyer. So I said, I'm going to write her. I figured, she'll never write me back. I mean, this is the ambassador's wife. I'm just a little guy in Los Angeles. And she wrote me back and she invited me to Washington, and I went. And she became a great partner. I think Catherine Meyer is a great fighter and really did so much for so many parents and children. But we ended up making 2 films. And I still remember that when we were sitting in a hotel room in New York and decided to make the second film. And I don't know, somewhere Catherine had somebody who would donate money, and so we started making that film. So it was through Catherine's organizations that these films were made, all pro bono. We didn't get paid for any of this. So it was just, we felt that this issue was so important that it needed to get out into the public. So I'd like to have, we made the film that was highlighted in this panel, which I assume some of the audience has seen. We decided to put together a 7-minute film or clip, I would say, with 3 different issues. The 3 issues being time, forgetting, and emotional scars. So I'd like to show that 7-minute film, and then we'll come back and maybe we can react a little to those 3 issues, for the rest of the panel. So if we could play that.
One day in April of 1974, when I was 4 years old, my father came for one of his visits, and the plan was that he would take me to the Vigeland Park, which is a sculpture park here in Oslo.
When the time went by, I expected them back 2 o'clock. It was 2:30, and I took my coat. I could meet them at the tram station, but there were none. 3:30, 7:30, I went to the police. And then I think I said to the policeman that, can he have taken her to another country, to the United States?
He instead took me to the airport, and we boarded a flight to New York. I started having nightmares at night. I'd wake up and think that there were lions and tigers in the room. I became a really scared child. I was terrified all the time, and I started to forget what my mother looked like. I remember trying to picture her in my head, and I couldn't remember her face anymore.
I wrote it many, many years ago, and it was to you, and I didn't know where you were. And it goes like this: ensomhet, ensomhet, frid, musik, koraller, ensomhet, farger, blomsterdufter, ensomhet, alt. Og jeg was left with ensomhet, loneliness. It's beautiful. You were a special child, I'm a teacher, so I know I could compare.
You're not biased at all, are you?
Terrible thing to say. I lived a parallel life. I had my own private struggle and war, and on the other side, I had to work like a normal person. So they were 2 different parts of me. 71 years, and you have to have this story to tell people about your life. That's not, it's very hard and painful.
What I see after these days here is a very sad person, a lonely person, a person with regret, with a very chaotic inner life, very torn about what he did, about the consequences, about his life now. It's where he lives, this tiny little, dirty little place. The smell is pretty bad, and he's not doing very well at all. I'm full of emotion and sadness for everything that he's put himself through and put us through. For me, I'm left with devastating bouts of depression and anxiety, insomnia, and it's hard to admit that because I like to pretend that I'm doing fine. I don't think I can ever close the door on the past, but I can make peace with it in a whole different way than I ever thought that I could. Closing little doors, it was, it is, and it always will be what happened, and it will always affect me to some extent, but it doesn't have to take over anymore. I feel in control of my story. Like I understand it better. I understand myself better. I understand both of my parents better on the path towards healing. Vigeland Park feels like the place I disappeared from. There's a bittersweetness. I'm glad that I'm there. I'm glad I'm able to visit it today and reclaim it. There always will be some ambiguity in this story. I can't put it all in a neat little box. And it's mine, it's ours. It is what it is.
Thank you. That was, hopefully we can discuss some of these issues. Interestingly enough, I always empathized with Sarah's mother. In fact, when I interviewed her, it was very difficult to interview her. There was still lots of scars. And I'll think during the interview, it was mostly me talking because I had to get her to talk. But when I talked, I was telling her what I went through, and I went through pretty much the same thing that she did. And kind of my outlet was getting involved with Catherine Meyer, making the films. That's how I overcame this, because I was active. If you're not active in these situations, you're going to go crazy because you're sitting there and my children are gone, and I can't see them no matter what. So we find ways to adjust. But maybe we could talk about these three issues. And I think the first one that all of us who have been involved with this can discuss is time, what time means and how time robs us in many ways. And I'm sure you've, Dr. Greif, you have interviewed a lot of people, and maybe you could start off with just telling us about time and how time affects this issue.
Well, I think there are two elements to time to be thinking about. Number one, what happens across time, what happens across months and years when there's separation between parent and child, but also how the parent left behind conceives of time. So starting with the parent left behind, how much time do you spend in your life searching for your missing child? Are you allowed to go to a movie for 2 hours and put that aside? Or are you thinking, I need to spend all of my time searching? So one thing is, and no one can tell you this, there's no therapist that can advise you as to how much should you let your search take over your life, because it's such an individualized decision. You are thinking, maybe I should call this police station or this embassy or do this or do that. So that's the kind of decision making that that does tend to take over your life when you're a parent left behind. The other element of time, the first one I came to, was what happens across time. And it's not surprising that the more time people are separated, the greater the struggle is in trying to figure out how to get back together again. It's the sense of, my child was taken at the age of 3. I don't see him or her until they're 15 or 18 or whatever. I still want that child to be 3 because that's where that child was when I last saw the child. So time sort of tricks you in that way.
That's really true. And before I get to Sarah, because she'll have a whole nother point of view about this, the one thing that I got from Sarah's mom was her bifurcating her life in that she had a private life, but then she had a public life. And I really identify with that, because really one of the only people I could talk to about this was Catherine, because even we even discussed this, even our spouses couldn't really understand what we went through like we did, what was going on in our minds, and how we had to have 2 lives. One, we had to live, but the other side, this was always in the back of your mind or in the front of your mind. So Catherine, could you tell us a little bit about your experience with time?
I mean, the first thing I want to say is that actually, for me, watching those clips is still, so many years later, is incredibly difficult to watch. So in that instance, time actually has not solved anything for me. If you ask me to talk about the issue, if you ask me to talk how it was for me to lose my children, I still find it incredibly difficult to talk about. So time doesn't, in my case, and everybody's different, solve anything. But on the more pragmatic thing, time is, I lost my children when they were 7 and 9, and they were children. And the first time I saw them, when they were basically hairy boys with hairy arms and a hairy hair. And it's a visual, but as a mother, you can imagine, sort of, you had your little children who used to come tap, tap, tap and sleep in your bed and cuddle in the morning. And the first time you see them after 10 years is basically they're not adults, but they're teenagers. And you've missed all this time. And I think time, for me, hasn't solved anything, but I think for a parent is a very different experience to a child. And for my children, what I was always worried about is, how are they going to forget me? How is their life going to be without a mother? How is it going to be for them to go to school and on Mother's Day, when they have to draw something for their mother? How are they going to cope with that? And so I think time for an adult, for a parent, is very different to what probably Sarah, Cecilie, or my children, because they probably forgot about us in some ways, forgot our image. But as a parent, I think time did not solve anything. It probably made it worse.
I agree with that. And of course, it's a different perspective for the child, as you say. I mean, as adults, it's always there. It's always there. And, as you say, it's always there now. It's still there, because you keep thinking, I didn't see them when they were 10. Wasn't there for their 12th birthday, etc. But for the child, and this is highlighted in the film, it's a different issue because when they leave, there's some, at least in the case of Sarah Cecilie, she was so young. So perhaps, Sarah, you could talk a little bit about time from your or a child's perspective.
Sure. It's painful to hear, but two parents talk about how difficult that the time still is, but it's very honest, and I honor that and understand that. And as a parent myself, I can empathize even more than I could when I didn't have children myself. In the work that I do with other children, almost exclusively adult children and almost exclusively females who reach out to me to share their experiences with having been parentally abducted children, the element of time is so huge, and just how quickly we have gained this sort of strange comfort in understanding that there are these parallels in that it doesn't take long at all when you're a very young child, and even when you're not that young, even when you're 9 or 10 or 11, or that there's something about the trauma, I guess, and the drama of being whipped away from a parent and being told lies, or being sort of swept up in some sort of new reality, or whatever it is for each of us, whatever mix of those elements it is for us. It didn't take long at all, and we've come to the conclusion, and most of us are like intelligent people. So I thought for a long time, before I met other children who had been through something like this, that there must have been something wrong with me. I mean, like, how could I have forgotten so quickly and been duped so easily, manipulated and fooled and tricked so easily and quickly? Part of my depression, I think, and part of the sort of self-image I developed of myself was that, boy, you must be some stupid, evil girl to have allowed yourself to be manipulated that way. And meeting these other children of abduction, finding that we share this was very comforting in some strange way. And I think that it has something to do with self-preservation, and the fact that at least you do have one adult figure to kind of cling on to, because what we recognized was we were abducted, but we didn't abduct ourselves. Like, so we didn't actively go along with it. It happened to us. And so we lost a parent. Our parent was stolen from us, even though we were stolen from them, if that makes sense, as well. And so I think in my case, and I was so young, my father told me at first that my mother was dead, that was the reason she wasn't there. And so imagine the shock of thinking that, grieving and not having much time to grieve, but just, mom's dead. My mom's dead. Mommy's dead. I was 4 years old. I can't even imagine. I just remember glimmers of the shock of that. But I was already being, converted to Judaism and learning English and, getting to meet relatives in New York and having pizza and ice cream in the streets of New York. So things changed so quickly and so dramatically on an emotional level, and on a where my location was changed so drastically. And it was only with time, as an adult, that it hit me. The full force of all those losses, of all the losses of time, hit me. And I remember when I met my mother for the first time when I was 18, one of the first things that she wanted to do was for me to take off my right shoe and sock. And I looked at her, I said, "What? Why?" And she said, "Please, please." And she had such a desperation that I did it. I mean, it felt sort of awkward, but I thought, okay. I didn't even know, but she remembered as my mother that I have a little birthmark on my right foot in one particular place, and just on my ankle or wherever. And I mean, she like held my foot like it was a baby. And at the time I thought it was bizarre, and I, you know, I had a strong reaction to it. It was a little too much. But now as a mother, oh my goodness, I mean, you know, I understand that so much. She needed something to connect her back to the child. I'm her only child, to this child that she'd lost for so many years. And unlike Catherine and Glenn, the one difference, I wonder, my mother did not know where I was most of the time. She had no idea if I was dead or alive. Not that it makes it much easier to know but have no connection. But for my mother, there was that additional burden of literally from day to day knowing that I was traveling around and who knows where I was, Canada, Mexico, you know, somewhere in the 50 states, begging for money, you know, changing my identity. Was I dead or alive? So you know, that there was that maybe, you know, additional burden, not, you know, pain is pain and losing a child is losing a child. But it just occurred to me that that was maybe just one more burden in this incredibly, you know, painful, devastating loss of the most precious thing that we could possibly get as parents.
Thank you. This second thing I'd like to discuss is, you know, from the clip, and some of you have already, you know, addressed this, is the issue of forgetting. And I think, Sarah, you could start this because in the film, you talk about after a while, you couldn't see your mother's face anymore. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I'll be a little shorter than before, but yes, as I was saying, it took a very short time to forget. I mean, I was 4, so I don't remember exactly how quickly I forgot, but I know that it was very quick. I mean, within a month, I was being converted to Judaism and being given a new name. So things happened very quickly, and forgetting my Norwegian. I think that, and this is something my mother, even as a teacher, a kindergarten teacher and a special education teacher, has not understood until recently, and has sort of had pain about, and we were able to talk about it only recently. She has asked me how, you know, most 4-year-olds remember, you know, have a pretty good memory of people and places, you know, they have, but what I've discovered in talking again with others who've been through the same thing is there's something about the trauma of losing a parent and losing everything that's familiar that sort of speeds up the process of forgetting. Again, I think maybe for self-preservation purposes. It's trauma. I mean, it's a real trauma to lose a parent suddenly, and to lose a whole family network, to lose your home, your pets, your sense of self and belonging, your tribe, you know, if you will, all of it. It's just boom, it's gone, or cut in half at the very least. But then when something's cut in half, so much of it seeps out that you don't necessarily have half of it left anymore. So yeah, I forgot very, very quickly. And then of course, combined with the negative messages I was getting and just all the new experiences and all the sort of this new life that I was thrust into, this new identity that I suddenly had to step into, it really enhanced the process of leaving my mother behind. And it wasn't something that I consciously did, of course. It just happened. So it's really been befuddling to think about that and forgive myself for that, because you know, I had for so long looked at myself, like I said before, as this, I must have been the stupidest child on earth to forget that quickly. Like, what was wrong with me? You know, what an idiot. And I'd look in the mirror and almost cringe at just not wanting to look myself in the eye, just having so little respect for myself, because, you know, it made no sense to me for a long time, you know, and now I understand so well and have forgiven myself and can be there for others to help both parents and children understand how this happens. And it's no reflection on the quality of parenting that I received from my mother. She was asked to be the caretaker of the royal of the sister of the king. She was such an excellent educator and caretaker of children that she was personally asked to be, this was before I was born, to be the caretaker of these 4 children. She declined. She had better things to do. But, you know, so I just want to emphasize that I've had to tell my mother again and again that it was no reflection on you that I forgot you. It was no reflection on the quality of your love and connection. But yeah, another layer of pain, you know, that both of us have had to deal with. She having this persistent sense of, if only I did this or that differently, if only I bought you that ice cream cone that day that you wanted it and let you stay up late, or whatever it is, that she thought maybe I wouldn't have forgotten her so easily. And I've had that burden of, but no, it's not you. You didn't do anything wrong, you know? So yeah, so thank you.
Jeffrey, do you have any reflections from your clinical studies about this issue of forgetting?
I think I just want to reinforce some of the good messages out of Sarah, out of what Sarah just said, which was, of course, very raw and very emotional, but very real, about the self-preservation. It's often to the child's advantage to have to forget certain things, because how else do you assemble a life with the person who's kidnapped you? So of course, it's going to be an incredibly individual approach to that, but certainly the ability to forget, and we all have that ability to forget painful things, or when we think it's to our advantage to forget things, we do forget those. And I think, Sarah, you really ended up in a good place by forgiving yourself for figuring out how to survive with the memories that you have held on to and the memories that you had to let go of in order to assemble a life for yourself and move forward, which is what you thought you had to do. You were told your mother was no longer available to you and had died. So you had to move forward. And I think you've recognized that now as a really healthy form of self-preservation, and you're helping other people too to realize that. So thank you for your contribution to others.
Before I move on to our final idea, Catherine, you've addressed the issue of forgetting. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Certainly do have, because I find there are several points I'd like to make about forgetting. One is from the child's point of view, and I think also from what I understand, boys and girls actually deal with it in very different ways. I had 2 sons, and my sons did not at all react like Sarah Cecilia. And that's why with Sarah Cecilia, I bonded so much, because she was able to talk about things. My sons, they're not victims. They don't want to talk about it. But now, 23 years later, my younger son is a psychiatrist. So somewhere along the line, you know, it did happen. But during many, many years, nothing has happened, and he didn't want to talk about it. And then the whole point about negative messages. I think that children in general, but maybe boys in particular, I don't know, when they were told your mother did this and did that, and they probably knew it was all bullshit and not reality, but it was head in the sand. I don't want to confront a situation. So they told the judges whatever their father or their father's lawyer told them to say, because that was an easy way out. Because actually, if you know something happened to you and you have to go up and say something against a parent who's not physically there, I mean, it takes a lot of guts, and why should you do it? And so I think, and then the third point is, I think, age. I mean, Sarah Cecilia was much younger. And what I think is quite extraordinary is my eldest son, who was just 9 when he was abducted, although they tried to eradicate the French language, eradicate the English language out of his life, he spoke, when I first met him, 10 years later, he spoke English and he spoke French. So somewhere along the line, he forgot all the negative that is the issue that is confrontational, the issue that takes him to court, the issue that brings him in confrontation with his father, who's the only person there. But somewhere behind, he kept something about his mother. And what he could keep about his mother at the age of 9, not at the age of 4, was the language. And so that's, I think, what I wanted to say. But I think from Joel's point of view, I also have forgotten everything. And you ask my husband, and people sort of say, you know, how was it here and there? And I can't remember. I can't remember some court hearing. I can't remember some of the horrible, horrible stories I had to go through. I can't remember them. My husband does, because he was there and he was not leading the same experiences I have. So forgetting is very interesting subject, I think.
Yeah,
It's survival.
I think I won't say any more about that because I agree completely with Catherine. I've forgotten all the horror of 10, 15 years of court hearings in Germany. And my wife keeps reminding me. I say, oh, you know, I forget, you know, so that's really interesting. Lastly, one of the premises of the film was that these abductions hurt not just the child and not just the left behind parent, but the abductor, him or herself, are also hurt. So it's everybody in the family gets affected by this situation. And maybe we could just end our talk today with dealing with emotional scars that any of us might have, or that Jeffrey may have dealt with in his clinical study. So I'd like to start off with Jeffrey about this. And in general, what sort of scars have you found with people affected, either the child or the parent or the abductor?
Thank you. And of course, there are a huge range of scars that vary from one person to the next based on their experiences for the children when they were abducted, how they were abducted, what they were told about the left behind parent. So it's a huge range. One of the things that tends to happen is the whole issue around triangulation, and it becomes something that then can get repeated again and again and again. Once you have been part of an abduction, whether you're the abductor, the parent left behind, or the child, you are essentially locked into this relationship with everybody else in your family. If you wanted to divorce, you're still in the shadow of the person who's done the abducting. Very often abductors believe that they have reasons to abduct. So that leaves a shadow in the other direction. But the notion of triangulation can get handed down from one generation to the next. And that's why some kind of insight into this, if I was abducted and I was caught between my two parents, I would want to make sure that I did not carry a propensity to triangulate my children and other members of my family. If I am a left behind parent and I've been against my will triangulated into this battle with a person I thought I was finished with, and I find that I'm continually dealing with this triangulation around the love of my own child, I would think that that pattern would need to stop and not be handed down to the next generation. So some of this is understood through an intergenerational pattern. Again, there's a huge range of experiences, and it's hard to make any blanket statement that applies to everyone. So I'm going to stop there for now and turn it over to your other wise panelists.
I'd like to, I'm going to end with Sarah with this. And so I'd like to ask Catherine if you have anything that you'd like to add about whether with yourself or with people you've seen, emotional scars.
So I think that there are huge emotional scars, and it all depends on individuals. And that's the point. And that's where I think Glenn and I were so taken by Sarah Cecilia, that she actually had the guts and had the willingness to come out and talk about it. Because I think most abducted children, I mean, if my sons knew that I was doing this panel, somewhere they'd be horrified, because they do not want to be seen as victims. And what is so impressive with Sarah Cecilia, she wanted to talk about the issue, to talk about how it feels as a child. And she got married, she has children, and she's been an amazing voice on this issue. So, you know, I think Glenn and I could raise a glass to Sarah Cecilia 1,000 times that she's had the guts to do it, because I think my kids find it very difficult. And I understand why they find it difficult. And I think as a parent, I find it difficult to talk about it. You know, and I'm sitting in the House of Lords and I'm involved in other issues because I don't want to talk about this issue anymore. I can't bear it. I hate it.
I agree with you, because I'm going to turn this over to her now. But Sarah, even to be in this film, took a lot of inner guts to do this. I mean, to make a film, you're on the other side of the camera, you're making the film. I'm not pointing it at myself, but when you're the person who people are seeing, that takes a lot of ability to do that. And I think for Sarah, it was the need to tell this story so she could help other people. So it took a lot of fortitude for Sarah for you to do this, and we do appreciate it. So maybe you could end our conversation with how you feel about the emotional scars that are left, not just for you, but for both of your parents.
Well, thank you so much for the honesty. I'm just so touched, and this is so important to be real about this as parents, as children, as survivors. Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, I'll share this. I had what I hope is my last ever psychiatric experience. Psychiatric experience. I was got terribly, terribly depressed, and this is something that has just kept coming up and kept coming up and kept coming up, to the point where they thought, oh, maybe there's something genetic or biological going on. And then the last few years, I decided no more medications, no more, let me get to the root of what's going on here. And not that I'm categorically against medication when that's needed, but I felt that for me, I needed to get deeper. So for the last 3 years, I've really done this deeper level of self-help work, you could say. One thing that has been so helpful is the concepts of nonviolent communication, and by Marshall Rosenberg, and looking into the concepts of unmet needs and how easily we miscommunicate with one another, and how emotionally violent we can be with one another when we communicate and when we're hurting. It's been a game changer for me, even in understanding my father. First and foremost, understanding myself and being more forgiving of myself and of my failings and of my neuroticism and issues and whatever it is, and my own interpersonal communication with family and friends today. But it has just looking at the unmet needs. I mean, talk about unmet needs. That is key in dealing with parental abduction. From the parent's perspective, the unmet need and desire to be there for your children, to be there with your children, to know how they're doing, to be engaged and involved, to become the tribe that you want to become with your family, with the children that you brought to this world. And for me, I use nonviolent communication to deal with a lot of the anger that I had towards my father. I looked into and his unmet needs. None of it was an excuse, has become an excuse for very poor choices, terrible choices devastating choices that he made to abduct, and he abducted twice, don't forget. He abducted his first set of children too. So this is a serial abductor, so to speak. And looking into the fact that he lost his mother when he was 13, and his older sister died a few years later, and he was abused, and looking into his understanding more of who he is, and that he was 90 years old, that I wanted to have a little bit of quality time with him and on my terms. And we've been able to do that, and it's been very healing. And at the same time, I'm writing a book about the abduction, about my experiences, about my journey and story. So he's not getting off the hook, but there's been a certain level of peace and understanding without accepting wrong behavior and wrongful actions. And then I had to do a fair amount of work with my mom, of reconnecting and connecting with her pain, because I have felt, I'm getting past it now, we're getting past it together, that no matter what I do today, I can't give her back that little child that she lost. And I can't fix it for her. I can't take away all those years of devastating loneliness and pain and devastation and shame and all of that. But and I, for a long time, I thought maybe I should go back to the name that I was given that she gave me when I was a baby, which is Cecilia. Maybe I should get rid of Sarah. Maybe I should pretend that I'm not culturally Jewish at all, and sort of hide the American in me a little bit, and sort of move back to Norway, which I did for 10 years, and just turn into the Norwegian person I should have been had I not been abducted. And so that led to a lot of resentment and confusion and all of that, and difficulty. And now these last few years really working on, hey, this is me, I'm this Viking Jew, and I call myself Sarah, and it's okay. And I'm part Norwegian, I'm part American, I'm all of those things. I'm whole, I'm okay. I don't need to choose anything or anyone. I can just be myself, and boy, has it taken a long time to, take a little bit of the burden off of my shoulders and let myself be that, and let my mother be who she is, and let my father be who he is, and set those boundaries and limits, and just kind of try to make sense of all of this and breathe a little bit. My goodness, let me tell you, it has been, and I have found, and for a long time I thought, oh, there must be something wrong with me emotionally, psychologically. I just must be broken. Maybe I'm, I don't know what, borderline, bipolar, whatever the vogue, the en vogue diagnoses are these days. And I thought, no, I'm just a hurt and traumatized person who has dealt with a tremendous amount of pain. I've not known what to do with it for a long time. And I'm on a path of healing now. And one of the tools for healing has been working together with these amazing parents, Catherine and Glenn, who have been so open and who've been so powerful, where my mother has been more passive out of her pain, strong in her own way. You guys have been just powerhouses telling the world, what's wrong with the way that we deal with these cases, and telling them that no, being abducted by a parent is not a big deal. It's a very big deal for all of us, for all the, for the whole family unit, for society. And these, custodial conflict, even when it doesn't involve parental abduction, is becoming a scourge on society, all around. So many children and families are suffering and are being torn apart by, love me, love him, hate him, he's bad, she's bad, all of those types of messages that children get. So it can be just as bad when the children and parents are living in the same town, almost as bad anyway on an emotional level. So we really have a lot of work to do to build awareness about this, and to give people tools and hope and comfort. And so thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. I'm sorry if I've talked too much, but thank you.
It's actually, thank you very much. I think one of the things I have to say at the end here is children are not property. Children are children, and nobody owns children. And I think that's the takeaway that I came with the whole thing, is that they're and they deserve both parents. I don't care if the parents hate each other. It doesn't matter. Children deserve both parents. So I'd like to end this with maybe anybody would like to say something else. If not, yes, Catherine, go ahead. Go right ahead.
I just want to say one silly thing is when my eldest son, Alexander, at the age of 5 or 6, I can't remember, people say, oh, doesn't he look like his mother? Or doesn't he look like his father? And he's got his nose. And suddenly my son stood up and said, I'm sorry, I look like Alexander. I am me. So
Yeah.
stop all this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I agree with that. So Jose, to turn it over to you, and maybe you could just say our final words and we'll leave. Bye.
Bye.